Good day all, and welcome to our podcast, Building a Greener Future. My name's Steve McIntyre. I'm the Principal Urban Environmental Consultant at ANS Global. We're going to concentrate today on the power of nature. Creating, that's really what I spend a lot of my time doing, looking at how we can create a better future and look at opportunities in the urban environment. There's so much we can look into. And I'm very thrilled today to be joined by Jane Findlay, the President of the Landscape Institute and Director of Fira, Landscape Architects. And we're going to specifically look at urban design, healthcare, and education. So I'm just going to hand over to Jane now just to introduce herself, and then we'll get going on our podcast. So thank you, Jane, and great to have you with us today.
Hi, Steve, and hello, everybody. It's a delight to be here today. As you know, healthcare and healthy landscapes and healthy people is something that I'm really interested in. As you say, I'm a landscape architect, and I do quite a lot of urban design as part of my landscape architecture and master planning, and health and well-being, not just of people, but the planet's always been at the heart of everything we do. And I used to be part of a big architectural practice before we set up Fira. So I think for us, collaboration is a really important thing, and we can't do it all on our own. So I'm very mindful that we're working with other built environment professionals all the time to try and achieve high quality public realm. And it's really been emphasised since I've been president of the Landscape Institute, because as a sector, we can't work completely on our own. We're a very small voice clamouring for the recognition by the government as to how important we are. And I think we can only do that when we collaborate with other institutions, which we've been doing quite successfully over the last 2 or 3 years. And the messages, I think, are very clear around the health of our planet and the health of the population. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to our discussion this afternoon.
Thank you, Jane. That's a very good introduction and very inspiring, because at the end of the day, over the last 2 years, we've really started to realize how powerful nature is. It's powerful to our environment, but it's powerful to ourselves as a community. You know, our mental health and well-being, physically, how we react, even our behaviors. And I think it became really apparent when we were locked down that there was so many people that didn't have a connection with nature. And I think this is what you were saying is master planning, public realm. We need to start looking. I always say we should include green infrastructure rather than add it as a box ticking exercise at the end of a scheme. And I think which is really why it becomes a priority. You know, where can I include green infrastructure? What can be done, rather than quickly revert to concrete and hardscape? So I'm going to hand over to you to share some of your thoughts on how we can start developing these spaces and how we can achieve a better space for the community and the oncoming generations.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, it's very insightful what you've just said. And I think, well, it's not new. That's the thing. We think that we've invented this, but we haven't. It actually goes back many generations. And, you know, for hundreds of thousands of years as a species, we've been completely reliant on nature for our food, our shelter, energy, you know, in the form of fires. We've just worked with the seasons, we've lived within our means, and it's only really in the last 150 years that disconnect with nature has happened as we've become industrialized and as we've moved into towns and cities, and that connection with the countryside has been lost, and there's only a few people left in the countryside, as nearly 80% of the population lives in urban areas. And I think there's a sort of arrogance about human beings. Maybe it's just ignorance, I don't know, or whether it's arrogance, but we think that we can live outside of the ecosystem and that we're not part of it. But we are very much part of it, and our whole existence and our health and well-being is completely connected with the planet. And it was really interesting that David Attenborough at the Landscape Institute Awards a few years ago, about 3 years ago, when he spoke to our members, he was saying that when he first started in conservation, it was all about saving a single species like the whale, or then it moved on a few years and it was about saving an ecosystem like the rainforest or the Arctic tundra. And now he said he's come to realize it's not about a single species or a single ecosystem, that it's also interconnected. It's the whole planet. And we can't really address one thing without addressing another. So if we're looking to address climate change, we have to look at climate change, biodiversity loss, and our health and well-being, because we can't have our health and a good well-being if we're not living in a healthy environment. So in terms of design, it is so important to make that connection back again. And to do that, we have to look at how we refit our cities and also design new places with nature and green infrastructure at the heart of it. And to do that, I think we need to be looking at green infrastructure as an essential, a must-have, not a nice to have, which it's always been. I mean, the amount of times I've been asked in my career by a client or an architect to put a few Latin names on the plan as a bit of an afterthought.
Yeah.
I think we've got to get beyond that now, and we need to be starting any development about how we not just net zero, but it's about biodiversity and it's about how we fit into all of that.
I think that's absolutely essential. And we've really got to go back to, you should say, back to basics, back to where we were before we built. We also refer to it as a concrete jungle. I was having a conversation recently with a head teacher at a school, and they've got no playing field. They've got no means for the children they've got no connection with earth at all. There's no soil. There's no playing field. And she said 95% of the children have no gardens at home. So that is the space we've got into. And as you say, unless we take action now and say, it's not a nice to have, it's not like if I've got any room at the development, I'm going to put some green space in. I think we should start looking at the developments and looking at the construction before and say which areas we're going to earmark for green space. Because if we don't do something radically different, we're not going to start to achieve some of these visuals and the vision for the future, which is a greener and healthier city. So I noticed you made a comment, you said, how do we put health and well-being at the heart of everything we do? Well, if you think of schools and you think of children and the oncoming generation, heart and well-being of everything we should do should become part of the landscape architecture at the beginning, do you think?
Yeah, I'm actually quite heartened to hear that there's a new GCSE about nature and the natural environment. And oh my goodness, I'd have jumped at doing that. But wouldn't it be great to teach children about it all the way through? But I also think it's about raising expectations of people, because I think people are just so glad to have a new home or a new school or a new hospital or a new road without really considering the quality of it. And I think it all comes down to quality and that intangible thing, beauty, which is so difficult to define. And we all need beauty in our lives. And I do think that we have a big educational piece to do, not just with children, but for all of us, about raising expectation, to demand and expect more and to expect better in the new housing schemes that are being built for people, new buyers, to demand a higher quality, not just the four walls of their houses, but to think beyond it. The old adage is location, 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 and it's really true. And I think we need to, as you rightly say, is to start looking from a different perspective. Why do we always start with our master planning schemes with the highways? and then creating the outline of whatever the development is, whether it's commercial or residential, whatever it is. We always start with the highways. Why do we have to do that? I think we should be turning it upside down and seeing how we can start with some of the underlying things about creating green space, and how is this development, how is this project going to actually benefit people and nature. And I think that would be a great starting point. But there's a whole piece around education, and it's educating people to expect more, but also educating the decision makers, not to think of it as just another box ticking exercise. Oh, we've done our 10% biodiversity net gain. That would be a lost opportunity. We need to make it biodiversity net gain plus all these other things, because it is a very complex web of all these different layers to achieve what could be something really special every time we do a new project.
That is really, really true, because, as you say, we often look at a scheme and you say we put in the highways, we put in all the key parts that actually we look at what they're going to return on investment. And I think sometimes we don't realize that the power of nature and the value of nature. I often get it coming up, well, if we install more green infrastructure, we're going to have bigger maintenance bills. We're going to have more costs to maintain. But I think what we need to realize is that how much value do we put on health and well-being? As you say, B&G, do we just go for the bare minimum of 10%, or do we do what can be achieved plus 10%? And unless we start looking and, as you say, turn it on its head and say, look, I can deliver this. This is achievable. This is the space I've got. It's an achievable reality if I believe in it. Then we can find the money for maintenance. So I often say that a few years ago, we were maintaining soft landscaping. We have wildflower meadows. We've now built so much concrete that we forget that actually we did have a budget for it. So, and I noticed a comment you made the other day that landscape architecture should be forefront of everybody's mind. And this is, I think, something that we need to, a message to get over to the investors and developers. Have you got something you could say as to how we can encourage them to realize the value of actually green infrastructure?
Yeah, well, I think there are some, let's start off by saying there's some investors do get it. There's some very ethical and green investors and funders who are wanting to have conversations with our profession, and they do get it and they want to do the right thing. But I think there's a whole, there's a bigger piece around the importance and acceptance that natural capital places restrictions on economic growth, and will do. We can't just keep doing the same thing because it's always worked. Actually, it will dig us into a much bigger hole. So we've got to look at things differently, and we have to take a longer term view. Whereas in this country, and it's probably because of the sort of Western democratic system of elections, that our governments only take a 5-year view on any sort of strategic decision that they make. And they never take a long-term view, or very occasionally take a long-term view. And that's got us into the mess that we're in at the moment with
absolutely
transportation, energy, health. It's all quick fix to just get us through to the next general election. So there's a much wider picture. And there are figures out there that are not just pie in the sky figures, but figures that have been produced by the government that have shown that preventative healthcare offered by parks, for instance, in England alone could save £2.2 billion a year in healthcare costs. And more recently, there's new data that's come out from DEFRA, which puts the combined welfare value of the nation's natural spaces at £25.6 billion a year. And the most valuable areas, the most valuable parks, are in or around urban areas, which just goes to show just how valuable that is. Health. That doesn't
absolutely
even take into account the climate mitigation, the effects that green spaces have on mitigating air pollution and the urban heat island effect and suds and everything else. You layer all of that up, the savings in other areas would be huge. And I think this is where we really need to mobilize the sort of economists to structure the argument around finance. And we can't keep taking this very narrow, selfish development. I'm going to develop this, and this is the return on the development. It has to be about the bigger picture. So if a developer is building on a greenfield site, we have to really value the loss from a green point of view that development is going to take. We have to put a real value on it, a real value on the trees that are being cut down, the real value on hedges, the real value on the soils that we're losing, and so on. And that is not being done at the moment. But there's so much work that has been done on that. There are so much evidence out there. It's the case. It needs somebody or an organisation to pull that all together and really get the government working across silos so that we can deliver on every aspect of government when it comes to health and nature.
That's really, really true, because, as you say, I think I like the word you used, selfish, because that's kind of how we tend to think by nature. Naturally, we think of what is in there for me, but what we're focusing on today is all about health and well-being for the oncoming generations. So as architects and landscape architects, and even as influencers in our cities and towns and our urban spaces, we want to leave a legacy where we can look back and say, this made a difference. We often refer to famous architects and designers in the history of time, how they've had principles that have worked, and they've developed those principles. And as you said at the beginning, we're not reinventing the wheel. In one sense, it's not new. It's what we've overlooked. So can you help us how we can encourage those that are listening, how we don't overlook this anymore, but we actually start to make it happen? Because, as you rightly say, there's so many know what should do and know what they should see and what they would like to have delivered, but it's the disconnection between that vision and actually delivering it that's got us to where we are. Do you think?
Yeah, and I think we've got to learn from the past, to be honest, Steve, because and take healthcare design for an instance. If you go back to the sort of 18th century lunatic asylums, for want of a better word, because that's what they were called then, of course, and they realized very quickly that if they created the buildings within a natural parkland landscape and gave access to the patients to working outdoors, being able to walk around the park and working in agriculture and horticulture, they realized that people actually behave better. I think there was a recording that the numbers of those in straitjackets were reduced by 50% by allowing people outside to sort of burn off a bit of energy and to make that contact with nature and that focus on other things rather than being stuck inside the building. So behavior really improved. And they call them then the commissioners for lunacy, which is a really funny term, but that's what they were called. They regulated that every asylum had to have parkland. And of course, this was also picked up on by Florence Nightingale, who realised that, she is famous, of course, for her nursing during the Crimea War, but actually she's had the most enormous effect on the way that our hospitals and the way the whole nursing system works in this country. But she had a huge impact on hospital design in the 1860s. And she was meticulous about how she documented the detail of of recovery and the effect of environment on recovery. And she realized that access to fresh air, a view out of a window, it not just the patients were physically better, but their whole well-being, their whole demeanor was better. They felt better. They were happier and more jovial. And she recorded this, and she then influenced the design of hospitals. So you had hospitals designed around courtyards and gardens, and patients were able to go outside and work in the gardens or sit outside. And of course, that was the basis of a lot of our great hospital designs, like St. Thomas's. So, that work has been done, and it's all around evidence. Evidence-based design is so powerful, and it's something that we've been lacking in landscape design, especially in our profession for decades, because to really justify what we do is you need the evidence. And I think now there's so much evidence out there that we know that if we make this intervention, that's what the outcome is going to be. And I think as a profession, we need to pull together the research and actually make those connections so we can really present the evidence to the decision makers. And the other thing I think we need to get on and do is to become more political. And I keep saying this, we need to shout out more about what we do and not just talk to amongst ourselves, which we are so good at. But we need to find our voices. And Catherine Gustafson very famously once said that landscape architects are a shade-loving species, which I think was just a brilliant description of us. But we need to become a sun-loving species. We need to get out there, and we need to be more political. And I just think that if we educated our landscape students, whether it's landscape management, architecture, planning, whatever it is, in universities where our politicians and decision makers are being educated, would that have an impact on those people? Because they'd be rubbing shoulders with landscape architects right through their university careers, which they're not at the moment. So it's a brand new thing to them. And secondly, by us being associated with them, do you not think that would drag us along and actually maybe expose us to debate and controversy that we might not otherwise get into? So I don't know. I think we've got to find our voice really as a sector and be a bit more controversial.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think we've got to, as you say, rub alongside and get the message out to ones that can actually, we can, as you say, we talk amongst ourselves. We've got the vision. We know where we want to go, but it's the educational team, it's the health authority, it's the we need to work with them so they can actually, and the ministers, as you say, they can actually realise the value. I mean, like Florence Nightingale and the health and green spaces in the hospitals right back in 1865, and then just in the last 2 or 3 years, I've put a living wall. We actually did it along with some government money, and we donated 5 years maintenance, but we did it as an incentive to get it into a school playground. And one of the teachers said afterwards to me, "Do you realise the children's behaviour has changed in the playground since all this planting's come in?" I said, "Well, I'm not surprised. It's what we expected. That's why we did it." And the teachers recognised it. And then you speak to other schools and they've seen it and they said, "We want to put one in." But they say, we haven't got the message coming from the top. So as you say, we need to shout out. We need to make this known to ministers, to people that can actually health and well-being, reduce medical costs, improve education facilities. But it's nature, it's using the power of nature to do that. And have you got any suggestions of how we can, as you say, I like the comment about staying in the shade, but perhaps you stayed in the shade too long, and we've got to start to have some palm trees and starting to get some identification. How do we do that?
Oh gosh, I think it starts from the bottom. Everyday work, everybody's working life is, we're always having to justify what we do, and I think it's incumbent on all of us as practitioners and as suppliers and everybody in our sector to just continuously chip away with the people that we work with. Is to, in my case, it's to enthuse our staff and to make them feel as they're making a huge contribution, and to get them to, really love what they're doing. But also, for when everybody goes to meetings, we all talk to other colleagues from different disciplines, is to have a voice, is don't just sit there and listen to the engineers and the architects at the design team meetings, is to actually have a voice and have an opinion and really, really fight for it. And this, where we really need to address the issue around landscape architects in the public sector, because the public sector has taken a real hammering over the last 12 or so years with austerity, and we've lost a lot of landscape architects in the public sector side of things. And we need people in there with the local politicians to influence the local councillors and the other departments in local authorities, and to work with public health and so on. So there's a lot to do there, but I think a lot of this still goes back to putting a value on landscape design that has never really been there before. And if we don't do it now, I mean, I really feel quite, sometimes I don't feel that optimistic about things, to be honest with you, because we're just leaving it all too late. And by the time we realise it's too late, there'll be, more issues around human health. There'll be further issues around public behaviour and so on. And you said about in the education system, Learning Through Landscapes have done some fantastic work and research on how nature and access to outdoor spaces affects children, and their concentration levels go up if they can see green space. Bullying goes down by a huge amount, 50, 60% it will go down by. So if you get better behaviour, better concentration, lack of bullying, we're going to end up with a better educated and happier and healthier kids. I did a school we did some schools in Somerset, and one particular school, the head teacher, she was absolutely brilliant. She said, my kids are outdoor kids. She said, I don't want them locked up in the school all day. She said, I want them to go out between classes, between lessons, to get to different classrooms. It doesn't matter if they get wet or if they take a couple of minutes longer to get to the next lesson. She said, but they burn off so much energy. They get a breath of fresh air, which invigorates them and gets the blood flowing and their brains working properly. She said, they're outdoor kids. And, I left the school and I was completely engulfed by a whole herd of kids on pogo sticks. It was the most unbelievable experience, but they were brilliant. And it was probably one of the few schools that we've done where the teachers really bought into the whole outdoor classroom experience. And it's because they had great leadership within the school. They had a head teacher who cared, could really understand what their kids needed, and put their health and well-being, right up there. So that was a really joyous experience. And of course, that was all part of the Building Schools for the Future programme, which has since disappeared. And sadly, so has the quality of outdoor learning spaces because of the costs. It always comes down to providing the building, the box, the concrete, the glass, and the steelwork, and the green. The green has to disappear. So we've still got lots of work to do around that.
Yeah, that is, and that's unfortunately is what we see happening around us, and this is the purpose of today, how our health is affected by our surroundings. And what you've just alluded to there, Jane, is completely two contrast. You've got a school that's got open space, walkways with fresh air, green space, or else we build a concrete box with windows looking out onto more walls, more hardscape, and no connection with nature. And we get two, and then the results are two completely different results. You've got children that are pushed into an area, and you've got children that have got space to breathe and live. And that's really what our motive should be, and our goal is that going forward, we create these spaces to live, if you like. It's to live and breathe, and that's what the power of nature is, isn't it?
It is, and there's research that Natural England did with the University of Newcastle, which showed that if children who are brought up with a lot of green space around them, later in life, 55% improvement on their mental well-being. So today we're looking at children. There's a stressed and anxious, and there's a lot of mental illness. I don't know if it's just we're recognizing the symptoms of mental illness, but oh my goodness, wouldn't it be great if we could take that into consideration when we're building when we're designing the built environment, whether it's a school or home or wherever it is we work. If you look out of your office window once an hour for 30 seconds, just once an hour, it improves your mental well-being, and we all deserve that. It's as important as having clean water and fresh air.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is just as important, and it is, as you say, it's our life, and going forward, I think this has been a really, really instructive and powerful session, because if we start to open our voices and raise our voices, if you like, and get a message out there that using the power of nature, we can make a difference to our cities, to our towns, and we can actually help behaviour, help well-being, reduce costs on healthcare. And we talk about there's breathing difficulty, there's asthma. You go into the cities and it hits you straight away. You think, what are we doing to change this? Do you know what I mean? We've got to start, haven't we? Let's make a start somehow. Do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I say that the research has been done. I mean, there's research that shows that tree-lined streets, people who live on tree-lined streets, that the local doctors are actually prescribing less antidepressants. It's just such a huge thing, and I think that the medical profession are beginning to really adopt this whole thing around green prescribing and joining up the importance of green space, because we've often talked about issues around pollution affecting ill health, but we've never really talked about the sort of the built environment affecting our health. So we need pressure, I think, and maybe we ought to be joining up with the College of Surgeons and other medical institutions to really demand more, to work together to demand more for our societies, because it will make a huge difference, particularly with the effects of what we're to expect from climate change. And if the urban heat island effect is going to have a big impact on our inner city areas in the summer, for instance, raising temperatures and so on, greenery just drops the temperature so startlingly. I think there's the University of Manchester did some work showing that some shade from trees can actually reduce the temperatures by 12 degrees centigrade. That's massive.
Yeah. It's massive, yeah.
Massive. It'd be cheaper than put a whole load of air conditioning on a building. Why don't shade it with a few trees, Yeah.
And then we can reduce the air conditioning running as well.
Indeed.
As I say, we've got no lack of evidence-based design. It is out there now. We've not left. We can really say we're left with no excuses, really. We can start to make it. And I guess you've got some projects that you could allude to where these principles have been applied.
Oh my goodness, Steve! I have got loads of projects because
exactly.
Because I started off just doing a lot of design around designs around the healthcare environment, whether it was sort of general hospitals or specifically for oncology or pediatrics or dementia, whatever it might be. And they're all very, very specific in their requirements. And there's also subtlety in the design for that. But it's just so interesting. And the feedback that you get from the staff is amazing. If you think that you can actually help somebody do their job and help patients get better, there's nothing more satisfying, to be honest with you. And so we've got all that experience that's been well documented. There's a lot of evidence-based design in healthcare specifically. If you design it like this is what the outcome is going to be. And it is recognized throughout healthcare right across the world. So we've taken that and fed it into all our other work. So apart from the hospital work we do, of which I've got some fantastic examples that we did recently, there's the Dumfries and Galloway hospital up in Scotland, where we work very closely with the trust and with the clinicians to create spaces that would support their clinical operations and to support the staff as well as to support the patients and the visitors. So the whole thing is really holistic. And also, it's on the edge of a very scruffy end of town, but it has to connect with a very beautiful and sensitive environment. And we brought all that nature into our site, which was fantastic. Another fantastic healthcare scheme, as far as I was involved in, was the Defence and National Rehabilitation Centre near Loughborough, which is the replacement for Headley Court. Now, that is where the armed forces go for their rehab if they've been injured. It doesn't matter whether they're in combat or not, but they will come, they go to hospital, they're repaired, and then they go to the DNRC for their rehab. And it can be rehabilitation from a physical injury like losing a limb, so they fit with prosthetics and they learn to walk again. It could be spinal or neurological injuries. It can be post-traumatic stress disorder, brain, in all sorts of things. And we've worked very carefully and collaboratively, again, with the clinicians to create a whole parkland in this historic setting, just to support the whole healing process. But we've also applied it to some of our other works. So one of the sort of landmark projects for me was work we did back in the 1990s, and I can't believe it's that long ago. It was for the Ministry of Defence. It's their procurement executive down in Bristol at Abbey Wood. And basically they were bringing 6,000 employees together who were all very disgruntled because they didn't want to leave their part of the country, but they're being brought from all parts of the country into Bristol. And we had to create from scratch a 100-acre campus that would support not just the professional side of things, but the whole ambience and the health and well-being of the employees. And we wanted to do it in a very non-military, supportive way. And we just built on the natural environment. We brought woodland right into the site. We had a 5-acre lake, which within weeks of having just mud in the bottom of it, had sticklebacks and geese and all sorts on it. And in terms of biodiversity net gain, which we didn't even talk about in those days, we did a phase 1 habitat survey, and it was it was improved pasture land with very low biodiversity. We must have improved, if you worked it out now, if I go back to the old figures, we probably improved it by about 300%. Because there wasn't anything there, really. And then they found that absenteeism dropped right off. Collaborative working started. The whole thing was designed to break down the hierarchy of the way they worked in the MOD, and it was just fascinating to see, and we've been back to see it. We get let in every now and again when we get permission to go in, see how they're getting on, and it's been a fascinating journey for them, and we've learned a lot from that. So I think that's probably my favorite projects.
That's amazing. That's really, really enthusing. So we can actually start to see on these projects, everybody's gained. The environment's gained, the personnel's gained, the employers have gained. Everybody gains. So it's a win-win for everybody. And I think, just sort of thinking over what we've just been discussing, I think for me, one of the key things I need to take away from this is that I need to raise my voice. I need to start being heard. We need to start making, rather than we know what we should be doing, but we need to get it to the next level so that it gets done. What would you say? What would you take away? What would you give to a message to the listeners to take away?
Yeah, I'd say find your voice. It doesn't matter in what situation it is. We don't need everybody to be the next Bill Gates sort of type speaker, but we just need everybody to do their little bit, really. Whether it's talking to your local MP or your local councillors, or get something, if you want something doing in your neighbourhood, make a bit of a fuss about it. And we need to work with those communities who've been disenfranchised. We need to really work with the people that we design for, to really engage and empower them and talk to them and help raise their aspirations and expectations, so they end up demanding more, because there's nothing better than having somebody else as your advocate.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like your comment, wasn't it? Designing healthy places for people, it's not just an idea, it's an achievable reality. It is. It is achievable. It's been absolutely great to have you on today, Jane. Really enjoyed it. I feel really enthused and freshly inspired to get out and make our cities greener.
Yeah, well, you're doing a grand job, Steve. So thank you for inviting me to join you today. It's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for another session on building a greener future. Did you enjoy this discussion? If you have any further topics you'd like us to cover, projects to discuss, or any questions, please feel free to drop me a line at steve@ans.global. Once again, thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon, and have a great day.